Hey everybody, it's Steve. I just posted my videos from yesterday, which is funny because there it seems like they're almost always a day behind. But before I post them, I watch them, and you, uh, you know, a lot of really big time experts say don't ever watch your own stuff. Don't listen to your own singing, that kind of stuff. But I want to make sure my memory's not that awesome, and I want to make sure that when I post something, there's nothing that's just ridiculous in there, or something that I've said in there that's silly or untrue. Something, I like to be able to view it again. I've had a little time to think about what I said, and then I get to view it again as if I'm the audience, and I don't want to see, I want to make sure there's nothing in there that's just ridiculous. And I don't mean embarrassing, I mean incorrect. I don't care about embarrassing. When you go through life looking like me, you learn not to be embarrassed too much over time. So we are adjusted. So just so you guys know, and I've mentioned this before, but I'm kind of I'm addicted to like seminars, and I used to take college classes free by sneaking into the classes. Um, there was a period of time when I worked after hours, like third shift and stuff like this. And one of the little things I found was that I lived near the University of Oregon, and I could go to these U of O classes for free all day long, every day, because I worked at night. And I loved that. If you weren't in a program, the ultimate program for the degree, very often they wouldn't let you take a class, even if you were going to pay for it. So, but a class could be $2,000. A class could be $700. But either way, unless you have some kind of a scholarship or something like that, it's not sustainable. I took a lot of classes for money, that I paid for, like at Clinton Community College and Lane Community College, and lots of seminars. And some of those seminars are $200 or $300. And but maybe because it was forbidden or something. But one of my greatest pleasures was sitting in those lectures at the U of O in different classes that were interesting to me. I only got caught once, and the professor, who was a big PhD, I loved how he always referred to, when I was a new PhD, and apparently that was decades before. But this professor outed me in front of everybody. I had to be 30 people in there, and it was like stadium seating, so everybody could see him, and he could see everybody. And he pointed at me, straight at me, the one person who wasn't supposed to be there, and said, "I don't recognize you. I don't have you on my list, and I see you in here every day." And I said, "Yes, my name is Steve. I'm auditing your class." He said, "Auditing?" I said, "Yes, auditing." And he goes, "Okay, that's why I don't know about you." But then that was it. He didn't kick me out or anything like that, and I kept on showing up. So anyway, I don't do that anymore. I don't do any of that anymore. But now that we have YouTube, I sit in on lectures, not by crackpots, but by PhDs on YouTube. And one of my favorite ones now is Dr. Roy Casagrande. I don't know if you've ever heard of him before, but he's a bit of a ham. He does it because he likes the attention and stuff. But my mom, who was a teacher at Clinton Community College in Clinton, Iowa, said that every teacher is a total ham bone. They just love to perform. And so I guess, every instructor, every professor, and all that, they're all about the performance. And it's kind of what I do here, with putting out videos and stuff. I have no children, never have. And this is going to sound kind of sad, but it's not sad, I don't think. When I croak, when I leave this earth, I'm taking everything I've ever seen with me, and like everybody does, except that most people have their kids to tell their stories to and stuff, and their stories will be talked about for, generations. Little less and less and less as it goes, right? But mine won't. My every single thing for me is going away when I go away. That's not sad. It just feels like I have had a huge adventure, one after another, but they're all tied together into the same life. Where I haven't had to limit myself because of children, and I've been married. This is my third marriage. Which I'm not going to go anywhere on this marriage, but the other two ended, and I was a participant in their demise. The marriages, my wives are alive, my ex-wives are alive. Don't get it twisted. But this is kind of my way to put a carving on a tree, but even a carving on a tree doesn't last forever. But once your voice is on a digital, in the digital world or whatever, it's going to be there a long time. I don't even know what it would take to purge, like all these videos from everything forever, especially when the AI changes. I don't think it'll be up to people whether they purge a lot of stuff anymore. But anyway, I know that's really pathetic sounding and stuff like that, but it's a kind of a ritual that people go through in life. And I don't know how old that is necessarily, cave paintings and stuff like that, but I guess cave paintings maybe were the original YouTube. I don't know. But like, I saw this deer and this buffalo, and then they put a thing of their hand up there so people know it was them, kind of thing. Well, this is cave painting from a long time ago, but better because I don't have to do my hand. There's a lot of hands that are about my size. So this is really me. Anyway, that's the only time, hopefully, I will ever explain why I do these. It's not because I'm so proud of how I look. Quite the opposite. It's not because I think I have a bunch of wisdom to give out. Shit. I would lose that contest. It's because I've had quite an adventure, and I'm never going to tell all of it because I'm a true Scorpio. I never used to believe in any of that stuff, but one time I was sitting in a Chinese restaurant and I was reading the placemat of all the different, signs, astrological signs, and I read what their description of me was, and I was like, fuck, that is right on the money. Now, I read all the other ones, and none of them are really insulting, but mine was kind of insulting, except I'm a realist from way back, right? Forever. And so I'm self-deprecating, and I don't, I even find humor in it and stuff, because what else are you gonna do? Cry all the time? But there's something to that stuff, I really believe that. I don't know how it got started or where it's, how it got carried on and how serious it was, but we're looking at stuff, and then I've researched it a little bit since then. That caught my eye, and I was in my 30s or whatever. And, not research it like crazy, because otherwise I would know these things that I'm saying I don't know. But every description of the astrological sign that I'm supposed to have been born under on Halloween describes me pretty much the same way. Some of them are kind of bullshit because they only say flowery stuff, and if you read all the descriptions of all the different whatever people, they're all just really complimentary, and that's just not real, because not everything about me is a complimentary thing. My normal actual traits. I'm quite an asshole, in a lot of ways, like I'm unbearable to be around for long. I don't know how my wife puts up with it. She must have something wrong with her. But I like that, shoot. I wouldn't have anybody hang out with me if I was judged that way, I guess. But I'm dead on, for that description. And I've read several of them that differ in detail, right? But the ones that aren't all complimentary, I think are a little more legitimate. And maybe it's people's observations of people like me. I was always told, and I'm a standout, I have 5 kids, and I've talked about this a little bit, but 5 kids in my family, and I was right in the middle, the 2 older brothers, 2 younger siblings, and I was right in the middle. I was 180, degrees out. Everybody else had their individual selves, their oddities, whatever. But I was the one, at least I never got arrested. My oldest brother, Jim, I have another part of my family that I wasn't raised with, so sometimes I don't refer to them in that way just because I didn't meet them till I was like 19. I met my oldest brother, Joe, who was from my dad's previous marriage. We weren't raised together even in the same half of the country. But I met Joe when I was a little kid. And then I met the rest of them when I was like 19. But my oldest brother that I was raised with, named Jim, he was a lawbreaker. He broke into people's houses and stuff like that. Well, I never did any stupid shit like that. I had a little more of a conscience than that, I guess. But we were told later that he had a pretty serious CNS, central nervous system accident when he was in puberty. When you're in puberty, everything gets thrown off while your body's trying to figure out what all the hormones are going to be, measured out as and all that kind of stuff. Only a psychiatrist that didn't have Jim as a patient, he just happened to be our neighbor, told my mom that he believed that Jim had what's called a CNS accident in puberty, and it left him with no serotonin. We didn't even know to ask these questions until Jim was in his 30s. He was diagnosed with hepatitis C, and that's a death sentence. That's like AIDS. He got really, really lucky though, and there was a lottery to experiment on people with interferon, a medication, and it was for AIDS. But he got chosen in that lottery, and it cured him of his hepatitis C. But while they were doing that never-ending amount of blood work and stuff like that, they found out that he had no serotonin in his body. That his endocrine system was not working properly, and that when my mom was talking with our old neighbor, a doctor, a psychiatrist, and he said, "Well, that sounds about right," because he knew Jim too, and he said that. It sounded like Jim had a CNS accident, and one of the things that happened during that accident was serotonin had been shut off in his body, like some gene or whatever got switched off or something. I don't know how that works, but that's what he said. And when he basically described that to us, and then later when I looked that up, it really nailed down my oldest brother. My oldest brother, I was raised with Jim. And it was a lifelong problem. Only my mom, I grew up with Jim, when I was born, Jim was there, that kind of stuff. And I didn't remember him as a little kid. I remembered him as a teenager because that's when I started looking at other people, I guess, in my relationships. And that's, the stage of, in your growing up, that's when that started happening. And by the time I was noticing how Jim and I interacted and things like that, and how he interacted with the world, he was past puberty, just past puberty. And then that was Jim my whole life. My whole life, meaning from then on, and Jim was murdered at 41 years old. And he had been pretty much a lifelong alcoholic and drug addict. And it's kind of no heroin. I'm sure he took it at one time or another, but he wasn't addicted to heroin. He was addicted to painkillers of various kinds, and mainly alcohol. And it led him down a lot of really bad paths, and the last path that led him down was actually shockingly not what killed him. He was going back and I mean, he was really, really working at it. He volunteered for the AA and stuff, and he was a big advocate for AA. Except that it was funny when I went down to New Orleans after he got murdered to sort his affairs, his final affairs. His backyard neighbor asked me about buying Jim's house. And when he was describing to me over a fence their relationship, he would say that, yeah, he wore a ring that was from AA, and he was always telling me about AA, but at the same time, he's drunker than Cooter Brown. And I was like, yeah, it's Jim. You know, an AA guy, big time AA guy, so he would go to the local county jail and volunteer and speak and stuff like that. And in his house, he kept all of his AA chips, you know, the how long it's gone or whatever, in a Crown Royal bag, which I found exceedingly poetic. And of course, when he was murdered, he was really drunk. And this is after Hurricane Katrina and Rita in New Orleans area, and he was living in Luling. And his house wasn't damaged other than a little bit of, you know, like flying limbs and stuff like that, but nothing water related. And when he was just after the hurricane, he had 4 or 5 different people living in his house with him that he was just helping out, and he was giving them money and everything else. And one of the people that he helped out murdered him because they were a crack addict. And when everybody left from the entire southern Louisiana area and went to Houston, so did the crack dealers. And the guy that was staying with Jim was jonesing really bad. And Jim was probably being a dick to him too, though, because that was Jim. And he was real drunk, at least when he got murdered. And the guy snuck up on Jim. Jim was watching a football game on his couch, fell asleep, and the guy cut his throat. Jim didn't stay there. He jumped up and ran around, and the guy stabbed him a bunch of times also. And Jim ran into the bathroom and locked the door, and the guy never got in because Jim was in there. It's where he died. And yeah, that's a whole other story. When I was living in Oregon at the time, and my mom and I had been talking to Jim. I was the only one in the family at the moment talking to Jim because he had been having in a bad way, off the wagon kind of thing, and been saying really terrible shit to my mom and people. And I was the one that hadn't cut him off yet, and hadn't talked to him for a couple weeks. And I was calling my mom saying, "Hey, have you heard from Jim?" And da 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 da. And then she called me one day and told me that the sheriff's department just called her, and that they found Jim dead in his house, murdered. So, and she was fixing to, you couldn't get down there because there was no planes going there yet. And so she was fixing to drive down to Jim's place. And I said, no. You stay where you're at in Iowa. I'll fly back. I'll rent or borrow a car and I'll drive down. And so that's what I did. And I couldn't have my mom drive down into that. And so I drove down there, and when I first got there, I was told on the phone that the police handed me the house verbally on the phone, said that they're done with it, that I could go in. It was all taped off, you know, no trespassing, all that stuff, but they said I could go in, and so fine. So I went down there, and on the way, I stopped at a Home Depot and bought a respirator and a Mickey Mouse suit that painters use and stuff like this. Gloves and boots. And notebook and pen. I didn't know what I would find, but it sounded like it was a bit of a rough law enforcement situation at that moment. All the police were like in Houston. They took their families to Houston. And still, they were, the only people investigating were not homicide cops. They were uniformed officers who had just suddenly gotten promoted to homicide, which is stupid. So anyway, they didn't do anything right. I got down there and got suited up, crawled through the doggy door in the back of the house, and immediately started documenting the scene, and took pictures of every single thing, took notes on every single picture, took a spool of orange string and set up the house in a grid pattern, being very careful where I stepped and everything. And then every single grid I photographed, and so that nothing was missed. And during that time is when I found the murder weapon. It was hidden. And I found a telephone on the wall that had a big old bloody fingerprint on it. It was on a like a play button or something like that. And a few things, I could tell, you do that kind of stuff in layers. And in one of the layers is the what happened layer, not just documenting all the evidence, but what happened. And it was easy to tell where it began, which was on the couch, because that's where the blood started. And then there was a giant blood trail from the couch around in a certain area and down a hallway and into a bathroom. And in the bathroom, there was a good half inch of blood on the floor that had coagulated and had maggots all over it and everything like that. But I could kind of tell that it started on the couch. He did his best to escape and went into this bathroom, locked the door, and then got in front of the door, and he probably was in there, turned his back and pulled up his shirt to look at the stab wounds in his back. And that's where he passed out and died. And I didn't touch the murder weapon. I didn't touch the phone. I played the message by pushing the button with a pen very carefully to make sure that not one little thing was erased off of there by my touching the phone. And it was a message from the person that asked him to put up the person that killed him. And then there was another message from the same person asking what's going on. She hasn't heard from her for a while. I called the police, who I had talked to originally when they gave me the scene, and I told them what I had done, that I had all these photographs, that I had all these notes, and that I had found the murder weapon, and that I had found the phone. And the cop said, well, we already found the murder weapon. I said, what is it? And he says, a pair of scissors. And I said, you did not find the murder weapon. I found it. And I told him where I found it. And he said, oh shit, we didn't even know that was there. Yeah, and I'm like, I can tell. It was a knife rack that was up underneath the countertop, or a cabinet. So at the countertop in the kitchen, if you reached up underneath this cabinet, you couldn't see it. You would find this fold-down knife rack. I didn't know it was there either. It was hidden. But when I was doing my search, I was looking everywhere and, wearing gloves and everything like that. I saw this thing, and I'm like, what's that? And I pulled it down, and it was sure enough, it was a knife rack that was undisturbed. All the knives in there matched. All of them were stainless steel, looked like, because they were perfectly beautiful, clean. And one of the knives in there was not a match. And it was a paring knife with a cheap wooden handle, and it was made out of steel, except that it looked like it had been in the ocean for 10 years. So rusty. But what that was, though, wasn't rust from water. The murderer, after the guy killed Jim, he spent the next, how many hours in the house trying to clean the place. the cops did do something smart, which is a product that I was unfamiliar with, this exact product, but it's called Humaglow, was the one I knew about, where that they spray this stuff around and they look at it with a black light, and then everywhere there is blood, even if somebody tried to clean it, it would glow. Well, what these cops did was, it wasn't Humaglow, it was instead like a smoke type of thing, like a mist or a fogger, and everywhere that there was traces of blood, it would leave a black soot so that you could, follow the trail. It's one of the things that made the blood trail stand out so well. But the knife rack, so what the killer did was soaked it in bleach to get rid of fingerprints, stuff like that. And bleach will start to corrode really badly, really fast, carbon steel. And so that's what happened to that knife. Well, it was just sitting there. I never touched it, but it was obviously what it was. So they had told me that they collected scissors, various scissors and things like that, because the stab wounds in Jim's back were about the right size for scissors and stuff, but they were also the perfect size for a paring knife. And so I told them what it is, where it is, that I had it. They need to come pick it up for chain of evidence, because I can't touch it, or it would destroy the chain of evidence. And that about the phone, and he said there was a phone. The cop didn't even know there was a murder weapon there somewhere there. Didn't even see a big white phone on a wall with a recording, 2 recordings on it of the murderer's ex-girlfriend. And I called them and they never showed up. I called them several times, and the 2 guys that were assigned to that, which, like I say, had been patrol officers before that, never, ever, ever came to get those things. They did not give a shit. Yep. They didn't hunt the guy down. I did. I asked around, and I kept on asking them, you have the guy yet? You have the guy yet? And got no leads. And I'm like, Jesus Christ. He took my brother's truck. He stole everything he could think of value out of the house that I just happened to know were there, because I had been there before. Jim had nothing. The things of value were like a computer, his gun. He had a pistol. Some little items of jewelry, mostly trash. Keepsake stuff. Jim never spent any money on that kind of stuff. He spent his money on fishing, which is what everybody should do. But anyway, so finally I started asking around to all Jim's friends and people that lived down there, and a state cop even that was one of Jim's friends. And they all said, if whoever had a vehicle, which they had stolen Jim's truck, they went to Houston, most likely. That's where everybody went, and that's where the dope is. Okay. His ex said the guy was a crackhead, so that's what I figured out. And why the cops weren't interested in that, I don't know, but judging by the murder scene and how they did their little investigation, all the shit they missed, they were just not. They had too many, they were as busy as a one-legged man in a butt-kicking contest, and they just had too much to do to bother. And so finally I was like, fuck this, and I drove to Houston looking for Jim's truck. I drove all around, all the Skid Row type shit, wherever I saw bums and homeless people. And then I decided, and I didn't see anything, and I decided to drive around to all the construction sites and all the day labor places and stuff like that, to just looking for his truck. It was just a black Dodge Ram pickup. And there's a zillion like it. So I was just looking for anything. And sure enough, I drove onto a giant construction site, or up to a giant construction site, and I saw a black Dodge Ram truck about the right year and everything, parked there, got out and looked at it, got back into my car and my mom's car rather, and backed away a safe distance until I could, until I saw the person get in it. I had to wait there 3 hours, and then eventually the person got in it. And I drove up behind the pickup and blocked it. He couldn't go anywhere. And then I immediately got out and got by the driver's door so he couldn't get out. And I didn't say a word to the guy. The guy was just looking at me like, what the fuck? And I called 911 and told him where I was, and that I had a murderer from New Orleans, from Katrina, that he murdered my brother. I haven't touched him, but I need the police to come here right now and apprehend him before I have to touch him. And I said, this is a citizen's arrest. And I knew the law on citizen's arrest. You're not allowed to actually touch him. And so the cop showed up and took him into custody. And once I did all the police interview stuff, I went home to Jim's house. And the local assistant DA that was working on Jim's stuff said that they found Jim's watch. The guy was wearing Jim's watch, which I had no idea. And that there was a big old bloody fingerprint on it. But it was Jim's blood, supposedly. And Jim did not have a nice watch. It wasn't like that. It was a Timex kind of a thing. And so, I mean, they had him on murder one, simply because it was a murder that occurred while, or a robbery that occurred just after a murder. That makes it murder one. And so we could have lobbied for him to get the death penalty. But when the assistant DA asked me, I said, I don't want him to get the death penalty. I want him to go to Angola. Angola is the worst prison in America, or at least one of the worst. And I said, I want him to go there and spend life, and then when he gets out, I'll take care of whatever has to be taken care of, unless they do it to him in there, which is very possible. So anyway, I spent a couple more months in Jim's house, fixed it all back up, got rid of all the, ordered a gigantic dumpster you could drive a car into, got rid of all the furniture and all the stuff that had blood on it, and which was a lot, and marked it as a biohazard and all that kind of crap. And just completely cleaned his house out. And I threw away everything. I mean, I gave my mom, Jim's stereo. I gave his friends Jim's tools. But I threw away all of his clothes and stuff like that. It was too creepy to keep any keepsakes or mementos or anything like that. I kept a game I built him, a decade before that. It was a board that had a hinge in the middle and closed, and the game was Aggravation, but I handmade the game for him, and I didn't want it to get thrown away. And it was his, so that was my keepsake from my brother. And I stayed down there working. While all this was going on, once I was done with his house, I put it up for sale, and there was a ton of people that didn't have a home anymore. They were just destroyed. It was like 200 mile an hour winds, sustained winds and shit like that for quite a while with Katrina and Rita. And so there were a ton of people with no homes. And so we sold it for about what we owed on it, what Jim owed on it. And there was $100 extra after that was all said and done. After the house was sold, there was $100 profit. I don't remember what I spent that on. But his house was completely done. That's what I did for a living, and so it was nice again. And no carpet or anything like that. That part was all gone. I just assumed they could do their own floor coverings. Um, I had to get rid of. I had to make some major changes to the bathroom where Jim had died and stuff because the blood was in the wall. It was the 2x4s, that made the wall frame had absorbed his blood and stuff, and it's illegal to leave something like that. So I had to cut that wall in half, and dispose of that material in the big dumpster and mark it as a biohazard. And then I rebuilt that entire wall and the drywall, the framing, the drywall, the electricity, where there was receptacle in that wall and stuff, and new door and all that. And while I was down, the whole time I was down there, there was absolutely no way or any place for me to rent or to even stay at a hotel because all that stuff was taken by construction workers and people that didn't have a home anymore. And so I had to sleep in Jim's house, which was fucking hella crazy. I mean, I got to the point where I was hallucinating in that house. I mean, I'm not joking you. I wasn't getting enough sleep, and I was working at minimum 18 hours a day trying to get done and get the fuck out of there. And, I don't know if I can describe what it would be like to be sleeping at night in the house your brother was murdered in just recently. I couldn't bring myself to go into the bathroom to clean it. That they pulled the body out of and the blood that was in there and stuff like that. I couldn't for a long time I could not go in there. So I took a plastic tarp and I hung it up around the doorway and I duct taped it to seal the smell as best I could and all that. And I lived there while I was, the main reason I was there was to get, I couldn't get a death certificate. They were trying to tell me it was going to take months and months because there was so many death certificates going on. But I harassed that Jefferson Parish person for so long. And I even told them at one point, I said, I get it. You have your life and stuff like this. You got kids and a house. I said, but if you need, I'll mow your lawn and I'll give you that time to fill out the paperwork on my brother. I was talking to them daily, and I wanted to be a giant pain in the ass. That way I would become so big of a pain in the ass that I would prioritize myself. Coffee. And that's how it ended up working. I got moved to the top of the stack. They knew I was from out of state, from thousands of miles away, and that I needed to get this nut closed up so that I could get out of Louisiana and out of my brother's house and back to my life and get this shit all closed up because nobody could start to heal. My mom specifically. There's no way that she could start to put that shit in the past for herself until she had a death certificate to look at. It's like it's not real. It doesn't feel real for somebody like my mom that had no, she didn't see the blood, she didn't see the house and all that kind of stuff. She didn't have the experience of tracking that son of a bitch down. And so she had the death certificate, and that's what made it real. And I gave the bank where he worked. He worked for a refinery, and I gave the credit union that was the refinery's credit union where he had an account. I gave them the new address for my mom, instead of Jim's old address, and told them all what was going on and stuff like this, and that I was working on getting a death certificate, and that they would get a copy and all that, a certified copy. And it was just took forever. And I was so relieved when the house sold. The real estate people were trying to get their best price for me. And I said, listen, Jim doesn't owe any money anymore. And I don't owe any money either, you know. And so we'll take the money that whoever's buying the house pays, and we'll pay off the house. And then none of us will probably ever come back down here. And I don't want somebody that just had all of their life turned upside down to struggle to pay for this next place. And so, you know, we didn't try to gouge anybody, that was what's happening down there at the time. And yep. And while once all the stuff that I had to do was pretty much done, that way I started my business up a little bit down there. Wasn't making any money, but I was going to Home Depot every morning, and you know, I bought a truck specifically so that I could have a big, full-size truck with a full-size bed, so that I could have a bunch of guys getting in the back and go with me to job sites every day. And all job sites were people's houses that had to have a blue tarp on the top, and they had to get their houses gutted out. So because once they had 4 feet of water inside, there was nothing keepable in that house, as far as the furniture and appliances and even the walls. The drywall had to come down. The framing on the inside of the house and the inside of the exterior walls, all that kind of stuff, all the insulation had to come out. In some cases, some of the wiring had to be removed and stuff like that. But the insides of the walls, like the framing, the 2x4s and stuff like that, had to be sprayed with an industrial type of anti-mold stuff. And ceilings had to be removed. It was basically like the house had just been built again. With the roof is on, the exterior walls are on, but then it had to be re-insulated and all that stuff. I didn't do that part. All we did was gut houses out. So, for each house there was a gigantic dumpster, and I can't tell you how many refrigerators left with a tow strap around them, or one of those ratcheting straps around it. So it wouldn't accidentally come open, because everything in there was rancid, and we fucked up a couple times and doors came open, and there was no getting rid of that smell. I feel bad to this day for all the dump truck drivers that were having to, that people weren't as courteous as we were. We were ratchet strapping down these refrigerator doors so they would stay closed no matter what. A lot of people weren't doing that. And so these big trucks were coming by and picking up our dumpsters every day and all day. And I would just go to Home Depot in the mornings and yell, "Trabajo, trabajo, trabajo." And these guys would run into the truck and jump in the back. And that's why I bought that truck specifically, was so that they'd have a big back end. And I couldn't buy it in Iowa. They are in Louisiana. They were all gone. Everything was either destroyed or bought. So I had to go take my mom's car back to Iowa, and then I bought a pickup up there and went back down and started doing that stuff, along with finishing up Jim's house sale and all that crap. That was a bad experience, in case you didn't know. That was a bad experience for me. Like one of those lifelong types. But I had already been pretty traumatized by a few other things, and so it was sort of like just put it on the stack, or put it into the hole in the ground in my mind, and pile rocks on top of it so it couldn't get out. That's my version of therapy. Anyway, enough of that bullshit. I started talking about something else, and then I just ruined the entire deal. So that's that. I don't know what else to talk about now. So I'm just going to let it go. It's like been 45 minutes. Hey, whoa, time. Maybe I'm getting better. I doubt it, but okay, I'm gonna bail. Today is Tuesday. Tuesday, yeah. And the whatever it was of November. 18th maybe? Maybe that. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, you guys stay strong, stay cool. Be grateful for what you have and what you have never experienced. Trust me.